My name is Jenny, and I've always been the kind of girl who stands out in a crowd. With my long golden blonde hair that cascades down my back, piercing blue eyes, and a fit athletic body, I often turn heads without even trying. I'm a 24-year-old senior at one of the most prestigious universities in America, majoring in history, which has always been my passion. Standing at 5'7" with a fit physique from years of soccer and yoga, I've learned to appreciate my body. My measurements are something I've grown proud of. I'm not too busty, but enough to fill out a small, sexy bralette. Today, it's a lacy white one. My legs are long and toned, perfect for the short denim cutoffs I'm wearing around the house. My feet, size 6, are adorned with white nail polish, matching my laid-back summer vibe. I live with my stepfather, Lewis, in a quaint house in Boston, not far from my university. Lewis has been in my life since I was 12, marrying my mother after she passed away a few years later. He's been more like a real father to me than anyone else could have been. This morning, I was sitting at our kitchen island, flipping through notes from my latest lecture on the American Revolution, when Lewis walked in, carrying his coffee mug. "Good morning, Jenny," he said, his voice warm as always. "How did your history presentation go?" "It was amazing, actually," I replied, my eyes lighting up. I talked about the lesser-known figures of the Revolution, and my professor was really impressed. He said it was one of the best presentations this semester. "That's my girl," Lewis smiled, taking a sip of his coffee. "You're going places with that passion for history." I chuckled. "Yeah, I hope so. I'm thinking about applying for a summer internship at the Smithsonian next year." "That would be incredible," he said, his eyes reflecting genuine pride. "You've got the grades and the drive. They'd be lucky to have you." Our conversation shifted to lighter topics. My day's plan, his work at the local museum where he's a curator, and what we might do for dinner. We've always had a close relationship, one built on mutual respect and understanding. As I prepared for my day, changing into something a bit more suitable for class, a crisp white blouse and tailored black trousers, I thought about how much my life had changed. From the quiet, bookish girl who loved history to this confident, ambitious young woman, ready to explore not just the past, but also her future. At university, I've made a name for myself not just for my looks, but for my intellect. My classes are challenging, but that's what I love about it. Today, I had a seminar on colonial America, where I was to discuss the economic impacts of the British policies in the pre-revolutionary period. Walking into the lecture hall, I could feel the eyes on me, but I had learned to use that attention to my advantage. I took my seat, pulling out my notebook, ready to engage in the lively debate that was about to unfold. "Jenny, your insights are always unique," my professor, Dr. Morrison, said as he started the class. "Let's hear your thoughts on the navigation acts." I began speaking, my voice confident, explaining how these acts were pivotal in stirring colonial discontent. The Navigation Acts restricted trade, forcing the colonies to only trade with Britain or British colonies, which not only stifled economic growth, but also sowed seeds of rebellion, I explained. A student, Kevin, raised his hand. "But wasn't there some economic benefit to the colonies from these acts?" "That's a good point," I countered. There were indeed some benefits in terms of protectionism, but the overall impact was negative. The costs outweighed the benefits, leading to widespread smuggling and economic grievances. The class was interactive, with students like me, all passionate about history, chiming in with their viewpoints. After class, as I was packing up, a fellow student, Alex, approached me. "Jenny, your presentation was outstanding. Do you think you could help me with my project on the Articles of Confederation?" "Sure, Alex," I smiled. "I'd love to. How about we meet at the library tomorrow after my last class?" This was the life I loved, surrounded by people who shared my enthusiasm for learning and history. After classes, I decided to explore more of Boston with my friend Mia, who's majoring in art history. We met at the Common, where the city's history was palpable. "So, what's your plan after the Smithsonian internship?" Mia asked as we walked past the Freedom Trail markers. "I'm considering postgraduate studies, maybe a master's in American history," I replied, squinting against the afternoon sun. I'd love to specialize in the social history of the Revolutionary War. That's ambitious, Mia responded, her voice full of admiration. You've always had this spark for history. Remember when you'd drag me to every historical site in high school? We both laughed, reminiscing about our teenage adventures. Yeah, well, now I can make a career out of it, I said, feeling a surge of excitement for what lay ahead. As we approached the old State House, Mia pointed at the balcony from which the Declaration of Independence was first read in Boston. Imagine being there hearing those words for the first time, she mused. It must have been electric, I agreed, my mind drifting to how those moments shaped our country. Our conversation flowed effortlessly from one historical event to another, until we decided to stop at a quaint cafe near Beacon Hill. Over coffee, we discussed our plans, dreams, and the latest university gossip. You know, your stepdad Lewis is really supportive. He must be proud, Mia noted, stirring her cappuccino. He is, I nodded, grateful for his presence in my life. He's always pushing me to chase my dreams, just like my mom would have. As the afternoon turned into evening, we decided to part ways, promising to meet again soon for another historical escapade. Heading back home, I felt content, knowing that each step in Boston was one more step into the history I loved so deeply. Back at home, I found Lewis in his study, surrounded by books and artifacts from his museum work. He looked up from his desk, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. "How was your day, Jenny?" he asked, his tone genuinely interested. "It was great, Lewis. Mia and I walked the Freedom Trail, talked history, and had coffee," I said, sitting on the edge of his desk. "That sounds like a perfect day for you," he laughed. "Did you learn anything new?" "Actually, I did. We discussed the role of women during the Revolution, which isn't something I've delved into much. It's fascinating." "That would be a fantastic thesis topic," he suggested, his eyes lighting up with ideas. "Women's roles are often overlooked in mainstream history." "I was thinking the same," I agreed, my mind already racing with possibilities. Dinner was simple, but the conversation was rich with future plans, past memories, and the comfort of family. As I settled down to study later that night, I realised how fortunate I was to have this life, this passion, and this support system. Every day was a new chapter, and I was eager to write it, one historical fact at a time. The weeks following our historical stroll through Boston were filled with the usual hustle of university life, but with an added excitement. I had begun the application process for the Smithsonian internship, and the thought of spending my summer among the nation's treasures was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. One evening, as I was poring over my application essay, Lewis came into the living room with a cup of tea for me. "Working hard, I see," he commented, placing the tea beside me. "Thanks, Lewis," I said, taking a moment to sip the warm, soothing liquid. "I'm just refining my essay. I want it to shine." "What's the focus of your essay?" he asked, sitting down opposite me. "I'm writing about how history isn't just about the events, but the people who lived through them. The unsung heroes, the everyday lives that shaped our nation. I've chosen to focus on women during the Revolutionary War, highlighting their contributions, which are often overshadowed." "That's a compelling angle," Lewis nodded approvingly. "Personal stories make history relatable. Have you thought about including some artifacts from the Smithsonian in your essay?" "That's a great idea," I exclaimed, jotting it down. "I could mention specific items from their collection that illustrate my points." As we discussed my essay and the internship, I felt more prepared and inspired. Lewis's insights from his museum work were invaluable. The next day, I received an email from my professor, Dr. Morrison, asking me to lead a discussion on the impact of the French and Indian War on British colonial policy. This was another opportunity to showcase my knowledge and perhaps impress a future recommendation for my Smithsonian application. In class, I stood at the front, feeling the weight of everyone's attention, but also the thrill of sharing my passion. "The French and Indian War," I began, "was not just a conflict over territory. It was a catalyst for change in British colonial policy. The war's cost led to new taxes like the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act, which were pivotal in stirring colonial unrest. A student named Sarah chimed in, "But weren't these taxes aimed at paying off Britain's war debts?" "Exactly," I nodded. Which is why the slogan, "No taxation without representation," became so popular. The colonists felt these taxes were unjust because they had no say in British Parliament. The discussion was vibrant, with students offering various perspectives. And I was in my element. After class, Dr. Morrison pulled me aside. "Jenny, your grasp on these subjects is impressive. I'll be happy to write you a recommendation for the Smithsonian. Keep up the excellent work." Gratitude washed over me, and I thanked him, feeling one step closer to my dream. Later that week, I met Alex at the library as promised to help with his project on the Articles of Confederation. We spent hours comparing notes, discussing the weaknesses of the articles, and how they led to the drafting of the Constitution. "You know, Jenny, your insights always make these topics come alive," Alex said, closing his laptop. "Thanks, Alex. I just love diving deep into the past. It's like solving a puzzle where all the pieces are stories," I responded, feeling the camaraderie of shared academic passion. That night, back at home, I continued working on my application, now with added confidence. Lewis joined me in the living room, reading a book on historical artifacts. "How's the essay coming along?" he asked, looking up from his book. "It's shaping up nicely, thanks to your advice," I said, smiling. "I think I'm ready to submit it." "That's wonderful to hear," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You're on your way to making a mark in history, Jenny." As I finalized my application, I felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. Whether or not I got the internship, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be, doing what I loved, with people who believed in me. And in that moment, the future seemed not just promising, but beautifully historical. A couple of weeks had passed since I submitted my application for the Smithsonian internship. The wait was agonizing, but I filled my days with studies, research, and the company of friends like Mia and Alex. Nights, however, were when the quiet moments of anticipation and reflection came to play, especially with Lewis around. One evening, after an exhausting day of back-to-back classes and a seminar, I settled in the living room with a book on early American democracy. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a floor lamp, creating a serene atmosphere. Lewis walked in, his presence always comforting. "Long day?" he asked, noticing my slightly drooping posture. "Very," I sighed, stretching my arms. "But productive. I delved into some fascinating aspects of the democratic process back then. You're a natural at this, Jenny. Your passion for history lights up any room you're in," Lewis said, his voice warm with sincerity. I smiled, feeling the fatigue melt away a bit. "Thanks, Lewis. That means a lot." As I continued reading, Lewis sat down with his own book, but soon set it aside, looking at me thoughtfully. "You know, Jenny, you're not just smart. You have this incredible way of making history come alive. It's a rare gift." I blushed slightly, not used to such direct praise. "I just love it so much. It feels like I'm uncovering secrets from the past. And you do it with such grace," he continued. "You've grown into such a beautiful, intelligent woman. Your mother would be so proud." The mention of my mother always brought a pang of sadness, but also warmth, knowing Lewis thought of her fondly. "Thank you, Lewis. I try to make her proud every day." He nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of pride and affection. "And you do, every single day. I see you, not just as the brilliant historian, but as the person you've become. Your kindness, your dedication, your beauty, both inside and out." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but his earlier words lingered, providing a comforting embrace around my heart. Later, as the night deepened, I prepared for bed, pulling on a soft, comfortable pajama set. When I returned to the living room to say goodnight, Lewis was still there, now with a cup of chamomile tea for each of us. "Thought this might help you sleep better after such a busy day," he said, handing me a mug. "Thanks," I said, inhaling the soothing scent. "I appreciate everything, Lewis, really." "It's my pleasure," he replied, looking at me over his mug. "You know, I've always believed that the world needs more people like you, People who not only understand history, but live it, make it better. You're going to do amazing things, Jenny. With those nightly praises, I felt a surge of confidence and love. It wasn't just about the internship or the accolades. It was about this sense of belonging, of being valued for who I am. "Good night, Lewis," I said, my voice soft with gratitude. "Good night, Jenny. Sleep well, my bright star," he replied, his tone gentle, almost paternal. I went to bed feeling cherished, motivated, and ready to face whatever the next day might bring. Whether it was the news from the Smithsonian or another day of learning, I knew I had support, love, and a home filled with history, both in its walls and in the hearts of those who lived within them. The days stretched into weeks, and finally, the email I had been waiting for arrived. My application to the Smithsonian had been accepted. The excitement was palpable, and I couldn't wait to share the news with Lewis, who had been my rock throughout this journey. I found him in his study, surrounded by the artifacts he loved, his face illuminated by the desk lamp. "Lewis," I said, my voice trembling with joy, "I got in. I'm going to the Smithsonian." His face lit up with genuine happiness. "Jenny, that's fantastic. I knew you could do it. This is just the beginning for you." We spent the evening celebrating, talking about all the possibilities this internship could bring. As the night wore on, we decided to watch an old documentary on American history, something that had become our little tradition for special occasions. After the documentary, with the credits rolling and the room dimming into silence, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I stood up, stretching my arms, and then turned to Lewis, who was beginning to gather his things to head to bed. "Thank you, Lewis," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "For everything. I couldn't have done this without you. I love you so much for all the support you've given me." He looked up at me, his expression one of pride and love. "You did this, Jenny. I'm just proud to have been part of your journey." I stepped closer, and on an impulse driven by the warmth of the moment, by the love I felt for him, I leaned in and gently kissed him on the cheek. It was a simple, affectionate gesture, one of deep gratitude and familial love. "Good night, Lewis," I whispered. "Good night, Jenny," he replied, his voice soft, touched by the gesture. "I'm so proud of you." As I walked to my room, I felt a new chapter opening, not just in my academic life, but in our relationship as well. Lewis had always been there, a steady, supportive figure in my life, much like the history I loved, enduring, foundational, and filled with stories yet to be told. I went to bed that night with a heart full of dreams, not just for the Smithsonian, but for all the moments of life that lay ahead, knowing I had someone who believed in me, who saw my potential, and who would always be there with kind words and a loving present.